We begin by thanking everybody for joining us today. We are now hosting our second keynote session of the semester. And as is our tradition, let me begin first by honoring and acknowledging that we here in Edmonton are on traditional Treaty 6 territory and an important trading center for the Métis Nation. I want to thank you all for joining us. We are so blessed to have Connie Stacey joining us as our keynote speaker. The Maji Center is a vibrant on-campus center for any student who wants to one day own their own business. And I will be putting in the chat how you can connect with us by joining our student Moodle course. Connie is let's just call it what it is, an entrepreneurial leader in Alberta. She's a change maker and she's making things happen. And I'm not going to take her thunder away, and I'm not going to tell any of her story. I'm going to let her do that. But we'll keep ourselves muted throughout our session, and then there will be time for questions afterwards. So over to you, Connie.
Okay, well, thanks for having me this morning. First off, it's definitely a pleasure to be here. I've had the chance to do lots of little things with Nate, and I've really enjoyed those interactions. So thanks for the invite. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit about kind of my story, what I was doing before, how I got started, kind of what the entrepreneurial journey looked like, and probably most important for some of you is some of the things I learned along the way. Some of you, this will be a cautionary tale. Entrepreneurship may not be what you want to do. For some of you, it might be good notes to take on for a journey that you hope to take later. So I'm going to jump in and I'll give you a little kind of walkthrough. And like we were just saying, there'll be hopefully some time at the end for some questions. So I'm going to just share my screen. Oh. And have you guys got it? Can you see me okay? Or see the slides okay, I should say? Yep, got a nod. Okay. All right. So our company, or my company, is called Growing Greener Innovations, and our main product line is the Grungeon Power System. So before I got started, I was not an entrepreneur by any stretch of the imagination. I was young, happily married to my wife, now of 12 plus years, planning to have kids. I took a BA at the U of A originally, and then went back to school and decided to do IT. So I worked in IT for about 20 years or close to, before all of this kind of started. I was really big all that time in sports, mostly anything that had to do with helping kids or equality, if there was something to help with women's equality or LGBT rights and things like that, you could expect to see me there. So before I started, I had no ambitions necessarily of being an entrepreneur, other than I thought, gee, it would be great if I had control of my own schedule. So if you've been thinking, gee, I'm not sure I could do it, or it might not be for me, I'm not that kind of person, everybody is potentially that kind of person. So a little bit about what we do. So the business we have is really centered around power, or more specifically, the Grungeon Power System. And we're a social enterprise, and for those of you who are familiar, basically that means we're operating with a triple bottom line. It's not just profit. For us, it's people, planet, and profit. So we have to be profitable, or obviously we can't keep our doors open, but we're not going to do that at the cost of the planet or at the cost of people. So that's something that's really important to us. And our mission as a company is to bring an end to global energy poverty. And that's something, by the way, if any of you really want to know more about, contact me anytime. It is a shocking issue globally. And I'll just give you kind of 3 numbers to give you a sense of how big an issue this is. Often in Alberta and even throughout Canada, we kind of take electricity and power as a given, because we have a very, very stable electricity supply. And even though we grumble about the occasional outage, for the most part, they're not that common. So we're pretty happy, right? But that's not the circumstance for the rest of the world. So number one, there are more than 1 billion people in the world that have zero access to energy. That's candlelight only. So 1 in 8 people. That's a big number. 2, there are 2.6 billion people who do not have enough energy to cook in any way other than to burn something. So that's a huge environmental problem, and it's a huge health problem, because we're talking about I think inhaled smoke is the cause of more deaths than tuberculosis or malaria combined every year. So it's a huge problem. And number 3, more than half the world's population lives in what would be called domestic energy poverty, which means they might be connected to the grid, and they might have power, but they might only have low voltage power. They might only have power for specific hours a day, or the outages are just so rampant that you simply can't rely that the power will be there. So the problem in the world is literally astronomical. And with it goes the fact that if you look at the studies, they'll show you that economic growth is perfectly correlated to access to energy. So if you want to end poverty, you must end energy poverty. They go hand in hand. So that was a big push of what we're trying to do here and kind of what got things started. So the problem we were tackling was looking at the energy market, battery systems, or BESS as they're called, battery energy storage systems, really high cost, requires lots of technicians and engineers, and they're super expensive and difficult to modify or move around. So that was the problem we were looking at. It's one of the big reasons why getting microgrids into remote areas is so expensive. So we came up with a system that was plug and play, scalable, so it works like Lego, and it was super cheap because we were able to get rid of, let's say 90% of the engineers or technicians that would be used in any kind of a system. So for the most part, that meant standalone systems. If it wasn't connected to the grid, there's zero requirement for a technician of any kind. You just snap them together and you go. So if you want to go camping, you're great. If you want to run a refugee camp of 1 million people, snap more together and you're good to go. Now, when you're connected to the grid, there's a little bit more involved, not because our stuff changes, but because how we connect has to meet the electrical codes and some certain things on that side. So it's not 100% plug and play, but it's pretty darn close. And the big difference here is we're taking about the average install cost for remote BESS systems from about $2,100 USD per kilowatt hour down to under 500. So there's a really, really big difference in cost. And we're really hoping that that will have a big impact on global energy poverty. So now to the story. So these two little fellas are 2 of my 3 kids. And our twin boys were born May 23rd of 2013. I love that I actually had to stop and think about that for a minute. When I was walking, I was off work and I was walking them, they were about 3 months old. So this would be close to that time, this picture. And I was walking them in a stroller and I passed by a house that was being built in our neighborhood. And they had the diesel generators going and it was super loud and smelly. I swear to God, I thought, if you wake these babies, I am going postal. And it's literally what went through my head because I thought, oh my God, right? So I sped up and I walked by. And then I started thinking, well, why the hell do we use these things? They're horrid. If you're familiar with them at all, you'll know they're super loud. People hate working near them, right? Like they're really loud. They're horrible, horrible on the environment. Cars have got nothing on diesel engines, nothing in terms of impact. And they're really quite costly to use. So when you actually break it down to how much you're paying per kilowatt hour, and think of a kilowatt hour as like kind of, standard, it's the size of battery you would have in your car, not an electric car, just a regular car. That's 1 kilowatt hour typically. So, you're paying quite a bit when you're getting that amount of energy from a diesel generator. So why do we use them? And I kind of started thinking, well, there's got to be a better way. And I had come from IT where we use uninterrupted power supplies, this type of battery system in every server room in the world because you can't have an outage, right? So I thought, well, why couldn't we use some kind of a battery for a portable system? And the more I started thinking about this, the more I thought, there might be something here. So I talked to some of my friends who are in the trades, carpenters and plumbers and things like that. And they immediately were like, oh my God, I would love something that was silent. Forget everything else. Those are bonuses, but just give me silence. But you can't refill a battery like you can a gas can. I thought, okay, well, that's legit. So I thought about it some more. And then I started to get into research. I was, okay, well, I'm off with babies. I spend a lot of time walking them in strollers. I've got time to think. And so I started researching. And by the way, if you're having insomnia, you need to put yourself to sleep. Battery chemistry articles in a snap, you got it done. So I started researching though, like what would it look like to build a battery system? What's involved? Because I mean, I was technical, but I wasn't in batteries. So I started doing research and more research. And then I realized, you know what? There's a product here. There's a huge market that's not being served. There's a good argument that people would pay for something that would replace what is currently available or have something where there's nothing available currently. And so I kind of got to a point that finally one night, I don't remember this really specifically, I was having drinks with a friend of mine who also has twins. So we were commiserating over a couple of glasses of wine. And, you know, I kind of went, maybe if you want to change the world, you have to win the game and make your own goddamn rules. And I said, you know what? That's it. I'm going to do this. And I talked to my wife and I said, okay, I want to quit my job. I don't know when I'm going to possibly make money, but can you pay for everything for our family for an indefinite period of time? And being the absolute saint that she is, she actually said yes, which, by the way, really gave me a heart attack when, like, about, 12 months later, she said, I want to have another baby. So now we had a new business and another baby on the way. So my wife carried our third. But it was a really incredible thing that she was willing to support us. So I went from research into actually starting and operating a business that had staff. So I quit my job, and that was January 2016 that I full-time started to take this on, and I had my first staff. And boy, did I learn a lot about, oh my God, trying to keep a business alive. Treading water is like jumping off the deep end into, the deepest part of the ocean. You're over the Mariana Trench. You're doing everything you possibly can to keep alive. And believe me, it was one heck of a time. Little by little, we got a little bit better. Okay, we have to do these things to keep alive. We need to kind of focus this way. And meanwhile, we're trying to navigate this path of creating a technology that's never existed before. And for those of you who end up going into entrepreneurship and you take on a new technology, there are some really specific nuances that come with starting a business that's evolved around tech, and especially new tech, because people are really hesitant to try new things. So getting people to try it, like, hey, if you've got a McDonald's and you're in the town where there's no other fast food stuff, boom, you got it. You're going to nail it, right? There's going to be people at your door because they know what they're getting. But when you're talking about new tech, they're kind of, ooh, I don't know, is that something I want? Do I want to spend money on it? Will it work? So they're hesitant. So there's a lot of complexities that come with doing a new tech. And that was a big part of that kind of early part, is figuring out what can we do to keep alive. We made some terrible mistakes, by the way, like horrid mistakes. Like, okay, hey, you know what? We'll sell some battery banks. Like we can white label. We'll sell it. They'll keep us alive while we're building our much cooler tech. Sourcing and getting good quality turned out to be an enormous problem, and it probably in the end cost us more than we made. So that was a big learning there. But we kept treading water, and eventually we started to doggy paddle and get a little bit better. Along the way, we started to pick up more specialized staff. We started to kind of fix some of those earlier errors. So at first it was kind of like this, this big, wide, swinging path. And then little by little, we just kind of started to narrow down and start to figure out what specifically we were looking at. And I mean, it doesn't take a genius to know that batteries are big talk, because they're used in almost every possible scenario you can think of. I'd be willing to bet every single person on the call today has a battery in their pocket, because you have a cell phone and you're using a computer. So guess what? There's batteries in there, and you're plugged into the grid, which also requires energy. And you're going to drive your car, and that has a battery too, even if it's not electric. Batteries are just everywhere. And everybody will tell you, I kid you not, everybody will say, you have to be a rifle. You can't be a shotgun. But there is a slight catch to that. When you start out, you don't know who's going to buy first. So you're going to spend a lot of time figuring out where that target is. Who's going to be the one that's going to bite first? Because there's going to be somebody out there, and it might not turn out to be the biggest industry, but your first industry or your first customer is probably going to be that one who has a problem that can't get solved, that they're desperate for a solution, and they've got nothing right now, because they're going to be the ones who are going to take your chance. So that was part of it. We had to find the target. And then as we found our targets and we got better, we just kept improving. We brought on more people, we advanced our technology, and then lo and behold, we kind of get to the next steps. Well, that led to a lot of good things. So today we're succeeding mostly. So part of that journey was, and actually these are kind of interesting because this is part of our journey, was these awards. And the first one up in the top left was a US Department of Defense Innovation Award. And we won it in the summer of 2018. And this is an interesting one for me because I fully believe that whether we like it or not, human beings work on bias. It's internal to how our brains work. And unfortunately, without taking a lot of effort to be conscious of that bias, it affects what we do and how we talk to people and what we expect. And when I started out, I had, and I mean, it's easy now for everybody to go, oh, yeah, batteries, obviously, huge market, right? But 6 years ago, people were like, yeah, I don't see a market for your product. I don't see innovation here. The dreamer, I went to one, workshop thing that, teaching certain skills and stuff. And, you get all these oil and gas people with their different products, and the organizer pats me on the dreamer. Nobody believed in it. Nobody. And at the start, that was a real problem. And I do believe that whether it was intentional or not, there was bias that played on the fact that I was a woman in a field that was heavily, heavily dominated by men. When I go to conferences, let's just say, and the ladies will particularly appreciate this, I have every bathroom stall to myself. There's like nobody, there are no other women there. And you know what? People don't necessarily mean to be biased in their thoughts, but they don't expect you necessarily to be the person who's going to come in there and have, this big battery system. I didn't look that part. I'm openly gay woman who plays rugby and hockey, and they didn't instantly jump to battery. Go figure, right? So this award with the Department of Defense ended up being particularly helpful because what it did was, it was one where we submitted our technology for review, and there's no person with it. It's all written. So there was no name, there was a company name, and there was description of the technology and demonstrations of how the technology worked, but it didn't say me. And so it took part of the bias out of the system. And what happened was we won an innovation award. And this was incredibly, incredibly important because this was a third party who said, hey, this is some really cool stuff. And it wasn't just any third party, it was US Department of Defense. And you don't have to like them to know that they have a very strong reputation for having some of the best tech in the world, right? So that kind of made a lot of people go, well, maybe I'll meet with them again. Maybe we'll talk just a little bit more. And so that started to open up a number of doors for us. One of the other things that really helped open up doors was I got involved with the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. So for those of you who don't know, there is a series of programs that are called supplier diversity programs. And this stuff is amazing, okay? The way it works, and it actually, sadly, the US are outdoing us in this one, but hopefully we'll catch up soon. But back around the 70s, 1970-ish, in the US, the government of the US said, corporations have to report on how much money they spend with diverse suppliers. So suppliers who are not straight, white men, okay? And what happens is, what gets recorded gets managed, right? What's the actual term? What gets, anyway, I can't remember, there's a saying. Anyway, when you record it, all of a sudden companies started to go, gosh, we have 95% straight white men in our supply chain. That seems unbalanced. So they start to create programs where they would have dedicated supply chain people who would go to conferences for women entrepreneurs, persons of color, Indigenous, LGBT, you name it, right? Newcomers, things like that. Veterans, there's a whole variety. And these people would go and they would look for potential companies who could supply what they needed, but it still had to be, you still had to have the best product. You still had to have a great price. You still had a great service. But the most important part was that it gave you a chance to meet with these buyers. And that's a really, really difficult door to get in. So I started going to these things. And actually, timing wise, it ended up being really good because the government of Canada did their very first trade mission for LGBT. And we went down to Philadelphia. And it was incredible. It was an experience like none other. Instead of going, and I don't know how many people on the call may have gone to a number of trade shows or conferences for business type stuff, but normally you go and it's, hi, how are you? And, people are trying to sell to each other and it's very professional, distanced, not bad, but it's certainly a very specific kind of feel. Well, I landed in Philly and went to this thing and people are running up and hugging each other and dragging them over to meet new people. And I had a friend that I knew there from EY Canada who was introducing me to a colleague in EY US. And when I explained what they did, this woman literally grabbed me by the wrist, dragged me across the floor to introduce me to her friend who was the buyer for Home Depot. Well, you'll never see that kind of collaboration in other types of environments. So this whole supplier diversity thing is really, really helpful for those people who are coming from a diverse background. You've got some challenges to overcome. This is a great way to help get you going. So that was a big part of what we did. We got some other awards that were, pretty helpful along the way. Some in terms of leadership. Last year, we got the Connie Product Innovation Award for Canada. So it used to be called the Ernest Manning Innovation Award, but it's Startup Canada combined with them for these awards. So that was really big. So that helped a lot. In fact, this past year, we also got named to Canada's top 50 changemakers by Globe and Mail. We were selected as CEO Venture, Woman Entrepreneur of the Year for Alberta, lots of good stuff. And by the way, that last one, I'm pretty sure is just a Survivor Award. You're still alive at this point. Woohoo! Here you go as an award. So these things really had a big, big impact on kind of getting us through. I'm going to jump and tell you a little bit about some of the things I learned along the way, because I don't want to spend too much time on the technology itself, though you're more than welcome to ask. I'd imagine most of you are not here to learn about batteries themselves, and that you're not planning to start a battery business. But if you have specific questions, do ask. Instead, I'm going to spend some time talking about some of the things I learned along this road. First off, you don't know what you don't know until after you need to know it. So I thought I was pretty well ready to start a business. I mean, during my BA had taken lots of business courses. I had been working for 20 years. I was in IT and managing a department for that and building really sophisticated software. And I thought I was ready, right? And then I'll give you an example of what happened. So I started out and I had my first staff and I'm paying them, I'm doing their thing. And then I get a letter from CRA and says, you missed your payroll tax submission, $900 fee plus a little bit of interest submitted. I'm like, oh, crap, okay, ouch, that was a hard lesson. So I submit it. And the next month I go, okay, it's due on the 15th. So the 15th, I go online, I pay on the bank because I've set it up now for automatic payment. So I go in, I pay the bill, and then a few weeks later, I get a bill from CRA saying $900 and some taxes, because if it's due on the 15th, you actually have to submit it on the 14th. Oh, crap. So I keep going. Then a few months later, I get another one. It's $900 plus some interest, because if the 14th happens to be a Saturday, you actually have to submit on the 12th or the 13th, so it gets processed in time. And these are things that, a payroll person probably knew, but I didn't. And it never even occurred to me, all the nuances that come with some of those jobs. So if you ever do go down this road, don't ever underestimate the importance of what some of these people bring to your organizations. And no matter how much you prepare, I guarantee there will be some of these things that you don't know it until you've already needed to know it. So that would be one that I would definitely put out there. Something else I would say, and this is not only from my own experience, but just being in the ecosystem and knowing and talking to a lot of entrepreneurs. looking at the product market fit. And I don't want to give anybody, I won't use a specific example, but I can tell you the number of times that I've talked to an entrepreneur and they have this piece of technology and I'm like, wow, that's really cool. But here's the problem. I immediately go, I wouldn't spend money on that. You know, and they think they've got this amazing thing, but they haven't taken the time to figure out, can they build that amazing thing at a price that somebody is willing to pay to buy that? Does it make their life easier? Are they going to buy it? Because if you're going to go into a profit-based business, if you're going to have a business, you've got to make money. And if you can't make money, you will not survive. What you will do is empty your bank account, stress yourself, give yourself an ulcer, and end up failing. And that's a harsh, harsh reality, but I've seen it happen so many times. So I advise you, if you're thinking of going through, don't just rely on your own opinion, because we all think our own tech is pretty amazing. I keep a book, by the way, of all the things I want to make. And sometimes I go back and I go, oh, thank God I just wrote that down and didn't actually do anything about it, because there wouldn't have been product there. There wouldn't actually have been a market. So this is one that I think people really underestimate. And this is something coming out of schools and research institutions that is really common. They work on something that's really, really cool tech, but it by itself is not something that someone is willing to spend money on. So be careful of that one. Determination that bursts on obsession. I honestly think, you know, and I can't remember the stat. I want to say it's something like 95% of all startups will fail by year 5. I think honestly, that is probably true. And it is because most people don't stick it out. I can't tell you how hard it is. There's so many times I could have beat in the walls. I'm not going to lie. I did. This was a low moment for me, but after a really frustrating phone call, the phone may have been launched across the room to shatter against the wall. And that, you know what, that's going to happen. But if you quit, you won't make it there, right? When you pass the 5-year mark, it's kind of amazing, because that part you're starting to now swim, you're targeting, right? You're starting to get a little bit better at what you're doing. But in those early days, there's just so much you have to fight through. There's just so much. So you have to be prepared that you're going to be unbelievably determined. And that means you better be right about that product market fit, or you're really going to get yourself that ulcer. With that goes hand in hand creativity. So a lot of people are like, I can't remember, I won't tell you some of the less savory jokes about it, but I will say that keeping this business alive has required a lot of creativity. And there has been plenty of jokes around the theme of Connie pulls money out of her ass. So you can take it from there. It's not true. It's not my ass, that's for sure. But I had to be really, really creative about how I could keep us alive. Because if I just stuck with that original route of this is how you do it, and you have to make money, you have to do this, and you're going to take on investors at this point, you know what? I wouldn't be here. Just plain and simple, I absolutely would not be here. I made all sorts of deals, and don't get me wrong, and nothing illegal or anything like that, but I had to be creative. So I had, like, one of the things I did at one point was I found a pair of angels. Now, I didn't want to give up equity, and I'll talk to this a little bit more in a minute, but I didn't want to give up equity too soon, because that can be really detrimental for the owner. You can find yourself with a great business and this much money out of it, right, for all your trouble. So I didn't want to give up equity, but I found this pair of angels who really liked what we were doing. I said, look, will you finance us to start to get this first product off the ground? If you'll pay for the inventory, I will give you a percentage of the sales for so many turns. However many times we flip it, you'll get a percentage. Well, that was completely unheard of. I don't know if I've ever met somebody else who pulled this off, but I did. And I convinced them, and they went for it. And that was probably one of the biggest funding things we did that managed to keep us alive. But it was always about finding some kind of creative solution. Friends and family, where can I trade services? I mean, that's another great thing. And I've put this out to plenty of entrepreneurs I know now, where I'm like, hey, right now we have extra space. If you need to store anything, come hang out. It's free. I'm not going to charge you anything. Just come, because survival is something that requires a bit of a village to do, right? So when you're in the ecosystem, look for people who can help you in different things. I didn't have a ton of equipment. So, who do I know who has a 3D printer who maybe could print something for me? Oh, wait, I can go to the library. The library has 3D printers. Or who has a CNC? I only need this one part. So I can't really afford to spend $5,000 for something that, is maybe $50 worth of parts and effort. So you find somebody who maybe can help you because they want to help other entrepreneurs succeed. Be creative. So with that in mind, find a successful entrepreneur and buy them a coffee once a month, because there is so much you can learn from other people in the ecosystem who've done it. They don't even have to be in the same market, but like that payroll example, they have been there and done it on so many of these different kind of challenges that you'll face. And I specifically say successful entrepreneur. And again, I wouldn't want to point this out to any individual, but there's a lot of people who, they're a solopreneur, they provide consultancy, but then they switch a lot. So they've never really made the next level. If you are looking to be that next level, you're going to have staff, you're going to have products or services, and you're going to grow that company to be something substantial, then you need to find somebody who's done it successfully. Because there's a lot of solopreneurs, but unless that's your aim, they're probably not going to provide you the same type of advice and support that you could get from somebody who's been down this road successfully. The selling CEO. I didn't think I was a salesperson. Turns out it's one of my best skills. And that's probably one of the two top reasons why we're still alive today, is because I'm really passionate about what I do, and I can convey that to people when I talk about it. And so they're willing to take a chance, and that's part of sales. And a lot of people think, and I'm sure there's lots of people on this call who'll say, I'm not a salesperson, I've never sold anything in my life. You're wrong. You're wrong, because anytime you sell an idea, you convince your parents to extend your bedtime, whatever it is, you just sold something, right? You sold an idea, you sold a concept, you sold a product. So you have done it. I think the ability to sell when you start is so, so crucial, because sometimes you see these great companies that have this amazing tech and it is sellable, but you've got two tech people, or a business person, tech person, but neither of them can sell. That company won't survive. You have to have somebody who can sell what you do. And it doesn't have to be that they came from sales. I didn't come from sales, but as it turns out, I'm really good at selling this because I believe in it. And I learned the skills to be better as a salesperson to do that. But you will need someone who can do this and do this well, and they're hard to find. I've probably gone through 4 or 5 different salespeople, and not because they weren't nice people or that they couldn't sell in other areas, but selling new tech is really, really hard because nobody wants to be the first. There's a saying that says, in fact, this is leading into the next one, which is the first customer is the most important. Nobody wants to be the first. It's a race to be second. For the customers, that's what they want. They want to have leading technology, but they want you to go first. You show me that it works, and then I'm right on there. So there's a race to be second, but getting that first one is incredibly, incredibly difficult. But there's ways to do that too. So one of the things I did was one of our first units we sold, well, not the very first, but early on, we sold a unit to the city of Edmonton. Well, I'm a vendor to the city of Edmonton. It was a tiny little purchase, but it didn't matter. I still sold something to the city of Edmonton. And being able to say that then made other people go, oh, okay, well, it seems legit. And I sold stuff to EY. And again, they bought $5,000 worth of material, but I sold to Ernst Young. And that really went a long way. And even though we now have a couple of contracts with the Department of Defense, they're not huge. People think Department of Defense, they think millions of dollars, but that's not how it starts. But you know what? Getting my foot in on the first contract, well, it was $200,000. It was an enormous amount of money. But the important part was the Department of Defense, by contracting us, said, this is good stuff. We're interested in this. And that makes a lot of other people kind of stop and look again. So getting that first customer, and ideally somebody who has a reputation that other customers will rely on, is huge. And you can go about this in so many ways. People think, oh, but they don't want to spend the $1 million to have my enterprise software. But you can do it other ways. You come with your enterprise software and you say, hey, you know, I'm really looking for feedback on how to optimize my software. Would you be willing to trial it? It's for free. We'll charge you nothing. We really just want the feedback. But guess what? Once they start using a piece of software, it's a pain in the butt to switch. So getting them started often is a great way to keep them and get them to be a permanent customer. And you can also do things like say, as used by. You didn't say you sold it to them. This is good marketing. As used by Ernest & Young. And that goes a long way, right? So be creative. I also am a big believer in finding your personal cheerleaders. I honestly, I don't know how I'd still be here if it weren't for, you know, my closest friend, my, kind of hate the term BFF, but I've known her since I was 14, and we still go once a week for our visits. And, you know, it doesn't matter that she's not in the same business as me. She just gets there and she's, Connie, you're always right. Connie, this is amazing. You're the greatest. Keep going. She's always there to cheer. And you know what? It seems like a simple thing, but when the market and your customers, and there's so many things that are telling you no, and that you're not going to get through, and all of those things, those cheerleaders will be what keeps you sane. So have some cheerleaders. Let them be there for you. So borrow their support. Let them cheer for you, but also let them be honest to you. You know, when you're being a stubborn on an issue, and they can bring you, if you trust them enough, they'll bring you great advice because they know you. And the example there that comes to mind was a number of years ago, my wife said to me, Connie, you are a big personality. When you come into a room and you're excited, you light the room up. But when you're in a bad mood, it is terrifying. People are hiding under tables. Ouch. But you know what? It's true. She wasn't wrong. I'm going to actually, hold on one second here. This was my last slide, so I'm going to stop sharing so that I can actually see people a little bit better, because I like talking to faces. So having people who can be honest with you goes so far. The last one I'm going to mention, because I believe we stop at 11:50, right? And I wanted to leave at least 10 for questions. So the last thing I'm going to bring up in terms of some important, I don't know, lessons, but considerations, and it's around equity. So a lot of people have kind of come to a place where they'll tell you the path for an entrepreneur is you get your pre-seed money, and you get that early part, and you get a little further, and then you go for your seed round, and you maybe get some angels, and then you're going to do Series A and Series B and all these things. And many people will go that route. And for many people, that is the correct route. But in a lot of cases, that means by the time you're actually, say, selling your company, you're going public, you're doing M&A, mergers and acquisitions, you're down to maybe 10% ownership of your company. Be aware of that. I have certainly seen scenarios where, you know, a founder has put their whole lifeblood into a company. It gets sold for $180 million, and the guy walked away with $1 million. He spent more than that in building the company. So do be aware of that, and be aware of what is it your goal. Like, is it your goal that you want to go public, that you want to do an M&A? Are you looking to be that serial entrepreneur? For me, I wasn't. I was really protective of my equity because I was terrified the second I gave up equity, they were going to come in and say, see ya, we're going to get a straight white guy to be the CEO. And whether that was real or perceived, that was my fear. It was definitely a fear I had. But even more than that, I really believe in what we're doing. I think the potential environmental impact and human impact is enormous. And I didn't want somebody coming in and making it all about dollars. Because you know what? Batteries is a business where there's a lot of dollars to be made. So I didn't want somebody coming in and saying, this is your path, because they owned part of the company. So be wary that the earlier you give up equity, the more equity you're giving up. Because at the start, $10,000 might be worth 10% of your company. But when you're at our stage, 10% wouldn't even get you 0.1% of the company. So all of a sudden, the value of that dollar goes a very different, has a different value, different output, different impact. So at that early stage of, instead of taking that $10,000 investment, you can go to Alberta Innovates and get a micro voucher for $10,000. That's huge, right? So this is where being creative in those early parts will have such a huge impact later. And I know I saw Chase Christensen on here, by the way, from RBCX. Hey, Chase, who knows a lot of my story and has been there and knows how much I have been digging in. Hey, Chase, I see you there, bud. Give a wave. I'm sure people can see you. That's Chase. By the way, really great guy. If you ever want to talk tech, financing type stuff, give him a call. I'll give him your personal cell phone. Is that okay, Chase? Yeah. I'm not actually sure I have your personal cell phone. But you know, it's definitely something you want to take into serious consideration. If you can be creative early, it will make a big impact later. So, you know, we're in a position now where we're going through our very first financial raise, and I still own 100% of the company. It's very uncommon. And that's going to be to my advantage because the company is now worth a fair bit of money. You know, at least as far as I'm concerned. Maybe Chase is going to go in the background, but there's definitely some advantages to waiting. So I'm going to stop there, and instead I'm going to open it up for questions. Hit me with your worst.
Okay, hey Connie, I got a question for you.
Sure.
I think I actually saw your pitch deck before with maybe Startup TNT early in the spring or something. But anyway, so it's nice to see you again. But I was curious, so all the research you were doing about this idea and then turning it into like you're putting stuff together in like your garage, your basement, like that's kind of what I want to do. I want to take some pieces of technology and like do a 3D printing system. And so I've got to really figure out like how this stuff works. So like how long did it take you to do that? Like was it a year or was it easy or was it pretty tricky?
It's definitely tricky, but it's trickier depending on the type of technology, right? So certain things that we were doing really required specialists. And by the way, two of our most valuable staff, I hired right out of NATE in the last 2 years. So if anybody was considering the electronics program, by all means, I highly encourage it because there's a lot of work in that space. But it depends what you're doing. Some of it was easier. I mean, if all you wanted to do was put together a really basic battery pack, you could do that. The problem is it's got a high likelihood of catching on fire, so I wouldn't suggest selling said battery pack. But figuring things out was, oh God, no, it's a process we're still doing, but that's innovation, right? Is finding how do you do it better. I would suggest that you be careful of scope. I don't really think my book is out of reach, but I keep a black book. My wife gave me for Christmas this nice leather-bound black book, and I put all my drawings and ideas in there, and I say, I think I can do this, but I can't do it yet, because if you go too many directions at once, you won't get there. So I tinker a lot in my spare time. In fact, I don't know, well, there's some fun stuff behind me at the moment, nothing too work related, but there's an Iron Man helmet and some Pokeballs and things like that. But I always have things like electronics on my desk. And so I spend some of my free time, which is still working, at kind of tinkering in the garage stuff, but now it's actually in my office here. So I don't know if that helps.
Anne, you had a question. Do you want to ask it?
Sure. I had some questions when you were talking about product market fit earlier. Is how do you avoid the temptation of staying within your first sort of market success, understanding that it may not be your biggest market? Like, how do you look beyond that?
That's a really good one, actually, because there's market fit and there's long-term strategy. I am at a place where now one of the things that I have to do, and we've kind of said we're graduating from GGI, or Growing Greater Innovations, to GGI 2.0. And part of that was bringing on senior people who said, Connie, you're wrong. Which I hate, damn it. But they're right. And we had to start looking at where do we focus. So even though, for example, energy poverty is where I want to have the most impact, it's not going to be the bread and butter. It's not going to be what keeps the doors open. We have a new product that we're be hopefully releasing very soon, and I will leave the very big announcement for later, but we have a very large partner who's looking to do a distribution on our residential BESS system, and that could be a very, very big project for us. But that's where, you know, we had to decide what's the right path in the long term. And one of the things we'll have to consider is, as much gravy as there is potentially with the Department of Defense, is a very slow process, is a very, very work intensive. So it might not be right. I remember reading, gosh, was it John Deere? There was one of the companies like that that won a big US Department of Defense contract and then turned it down because it didn't fit with their long-term model. So I think you really have to, once you get to a point where you've got customers and you can choose which customers you're going to focus on, that's where you want to make sure you're bringing in your specialists. We have a great VP marketing communications, and she researches the crap out of stuff and comes back and says, this is where people are going to buy. This is where competition might be low. This is what the long-term range in that market looks like. And I listen. You know, sometimes they have to tell me twice, but I listen.
Anybody else have a question?
Quick question for you, Connie. Your objective or your mission is to try to get storage to people in developing worlds, but your first product is probably expensive. Do you sort of take the Elon Tesla approach of let's build expensive stuff for people who pay for it, get the company's feet under it, and then be able to take those learnings to make a cheaper product, less expensive product, not cheaper? Or what's your approach to try to get a product to the developing world when you're starting a company?
I wouldn't say we took the Tesla approach. In fact, you know what, I'm going to admit it. I hate Elon Musk. I think he's really quite a piece of work. And Tesla might have maybe intended that direction, but I don't think they've ever fulfilled it. And now they're looking at things like space tourism when people are starving, and that doesn't fit me. That doesn't fit my philosophy. When we looked at the markets, we said, okay, this is where our bread and butter is. And if we can make profit off of what we're doing there, that will allow us to provide other types of products at as minimal margin as possible for other markets where they won't be able to afford the same bells and whistles. And part of the reason actually that we chose batteries, because I mean, not everybody would say, I want to save people, I want to make the world better, let's make batteries. It's not necessarily the logical jump, right? But the reality is you can generate energy from pedaling a bike or creating a pulley, but if you can't store it, how are you going to charge your phone later? How are you going to cook later? How are you going to do these other things? So I said, if we could give them a way to hold the energy, you can store it, you can generate it in a million different ways. And our system is input agnostic. So you literally can create a pulley over a tree and wind the sucker up and you will charge it. You could use a bicycle, you could create a handmade windmill. Any of those things would work. Or you can use a hydro dam, or you can use the grid. So we tried to go with something that gave people the most option with the smallest amount of cost. So we try and do it at every possible size. And then some bells and whistles just aren't really necessary for some folks. But the access to the energy, that's pretty important. So I hopefully I answered that question. Don't tell Elon.
Well, I've got him on the line actually, and no.
He sits in all my stuff these days, you know?
Any other questions?
I've got questions about your products that are like really specific.
Sure.
I'm not sure if you want to talk about them because they haven't come out yet, but so like a trend I'm noticing in like the green energy grants and stuff from the federal government is they're all aimed at homeowners, not home renters. And I like, although I support a carbon tax, I'm really scared as a renter that I'm going to be squeezed between my income not increasing, actually decreasing over time, quite honestly, and energy prices squeezing, you know, to the point where I'm homeless because I can't pay my energy bills because of a carbon tax, right? So like what I like about your products is that there's there's potential for like storing that energy and saving money, you know, like talking about your
Yep.
Grenjin. So
Yep.
I was like, but a lot of times renters are strapped for cash. So like, are you thinking about selling these Grenjins to the energy providers who will then lease them to the renters so that they can
There's
lower their energy costs? Or like, what's your plan for the Grenjin?
So there's multiple ways to do this. Certainly we could, and in some cases may well go through utilities who then lease the equipment. I'm not going to say who our partner is, but one of the things that I believe is that to get solutions like this to the world at large, we have to find a way to make it lower cost and monthly, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And the big thing here was if you look at so like now I'm going to pick on Tesla, even though they do, I'm not going to, their products are solid. There's nothing wrong with them. So personal stuff aside, if you wanted to get the Powerwall, it's say, well, you can't get it in Canada right now because they're only servicing the US because they're so backlogged, but it'd be about 14 to 15,000. And you can only get it with solar. So now you're looking at another 15 to 20,000. So you're looking at a minimum of $35,000 to get started. For the average family, that is just not achievable. So my philosophy was part of what has to happen in this market is a change of distribution channel. So we've partnered with a telecommunications company because guess what? Who has billing to every single person on the planet monthly? Telecoms, because you already have a cell phone. You already have internet at your home. So by partnering with these folks, what we're thinking is that this will allow people to do something where they can get a monthly payment option. And you hit on something really pretty key there when you're talking about saving money through storing at different times, Lisa. So one of the things that happens, and this happens in a couple of different ways with energy. We don't have this yet in Alberta, but this is the trend internationally, is that we are starting to move towards a system of time of use payment. So in the middle of the night, you're paying, in Ontario, you're paying about 5 cents a kilowatt hour. At dinner time, you're paying 22 cents. So by charging your battery in the middle of the night and using energy from the battery at dinner time, you will cut your bill significantly. What a lot of people don't recognize though, is you also cut your emissions really dramatically. So there's a rate, or they give emission rates based on peak and non-peak. So it's actually marginal versus average is what the actual terms are. But average says, okay, when we're not pressured on the grid, we're using more renewables, solar, wind, etc. So when we have those times, we have much lower rates. So in Ontario, it's about 20 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. But at peak times, they turn on what's called peaker plants, which are almost exclusively coal, natural gas, that kind of thing. So they're heavy, heavy polluters. So the dinner time energy that you are using, so that's your peak, is, I think in Ontario, it works out to about 395 grams. So you went from 20 grams to 395. So just think of how much of an impact that has if every Canadian household went from 395 grams down to 20 grams. So there's a really, really big environmental impact there. When you move away from residential, you get into like large commercial and industrial. They actually, instead of having time of use, what they have is a peak charge. So what the grid has to do is it has to supply these big companies when they turn on every piece of equipment. So if you're oh God, who's a car manufacturer, let's say, and they're running Monday to Friday, when they fire up those pieces of equipment at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, their demand goes through the roof. So even though it might come down at different points of the day, they get charged on that volume of electricity that they need at a time. So similarly to what you do with time of use, what you do is you use batteries and you say, okay, say they want to stay to 500 kilowatts. The system then goes, okay, we hit 480. We're going to take extra energy from the battery and not from the grid. And then when their load or their demand comes down, you top the battery back up. And what that does is it lowers their bills dramatically, but it also lowers the strain on the grid and the emissions that are put out, because now they're not trying to supply 1,000 kilowatts when 90% of the time they only need 500. Right, so there can be a big difference there. I'm actually, and this part is aside from my stuff, but I'm a big believer in decentralization of storage and decentralization of generation. A lot of people, this is an interesting thing. A lot of people believe that you should feed energy back onto the grid. I actually think that's wrong. I think you should store it and use it from your own household, because 99% of people will use more energy than they produce. So you will not make a profit. People will tell you you'll make a profit feeding energy back to the grid from your solar panels. You won't. Without a lot of subsidies, you will not make money that way. And what happens is you actually have less of a positive environmental impact, because what you do is you're going to create energy, you send it onto transmission lines or distribution lines that are going to lose on average, Alberta's lower, but let's say, or Canada's lower, but let's say 8% of the energy just from transferring it, right? So gone to the wind. But you're also not going to have any backup if the power goes out, because there's this thing called anti-islanding. If your solar panels, say the grid goes out, and somebody's got to go fix that down pole line, if you're pushing electricity onto the grid, you just fried that electrician. So yours gets closed down. So even though you could produce energy for your home, you don't. But if you don't feed back onto the grid, you can, right? Because that's where the danger lies. So I actually think, as much as people love the whole let's feed back onto the grid, I actually think if you just decentralize and have some generation and storage, it doesn't even have to be enough for your whole house. Just the little bit that you can do makes an enormous overall impact, because it's those big peak times. Like if you think about the grid being like a pipe with water flowing through it, most of the time there's only about this much water going through. But when we hit those big times, the pipe bursts. So if you can average out what we do here, we don't have to replace the pipe with a bigger pipe. So your options are spend trillions of dollars upgrading the grid or decentralize. That's my opinion on it.
Right. So that's why I thought you would be interested in selling to utility, because you mentioned grid integrity. And the only
Yeah.
people who care about that is the utility services. So why not get them to lease the batteries to their users so that they don't have to upgrade the grid, and then you decentralize the energy, right?
Yeah, and that's a definite fit for some places. It depends on the potential partner. I like telecoms partly for a number of reasons, partly because you have some pretty big giants that cover just huge, huge areas, where the utilities in different places, some places it's government regulated, other places it's not. It can be a more complicated kind of partner, but there's definitely one of the groups we have certainly talked to and had interest from. So.
One last question from Chris.
Hi, Connie. My name's Chris. First off, I want to say that was a really, really interesting presentation. I had no idea what you would be talking about today when I jumped in. So I felt that really interesting, especially that you were doing a contract with the Department of Defense. I thought that was really cool. My question for you is, I'm wondering, and maybe this would describe you as well, or maybe it wouldn't, but if you are sort of thinking of ideas of how to improve something, you know, I don't know that in my career I'd want to be a business owner per se, but I definitely think about like improving on ideas and whatnot that are already out there. Is that like, would that describe you as well, or, you know?
I think kind of yes. I'm going to answer this in a way that I think answers your question, but maybe not. When I approach innovation, I approach it a different way than a lot of people. A lot of people come from I'm in this market. I work for a utility and I have an idea how I can improve the grid, or I can improve transmission lines. Or I come from a university or a research institution and I research something that I think I can turn into a product. I don't do that route at all. I actually go a reverse route. And what I do is I start with the person with the problem and I work backwards. So that's what I did with the Grenjan partly, is I said, okay, if I am a single mom in rural sub-Saharan Africa, how do I get power? And what kind of power do I need? What are the requirements? And when I did that, I discovered, well, first off, I don't care if there's lines or grids or whatever. I don't care. It does not impact me. I need power. I don't care how it got there. 2, my next door neighbor is not a technician or an electrician or an engineer, so it better be easy to use. And 3, I am constantly moving around, so it has to be portable. And that became the basis for our system. So I don't necessarily look at it as how do I prove something that's existing? It's, can we find a way to solve the problem for the consumer in a way that's more effective than what's currently being done? So To me, I think that there will be a technology leap in places like Africa where, just like the telephone, right? They were bringing telephone lines across Africa when the cell phone came out. And they said, well, duh, we're going to stop. And we're going to get people cell phones because it's way more cost effective. And I think the same thing will happen with power. They will not build transmission lines to all these different places because it's just not cost effective. I also, and this is just a personal thing, and I'm going to say because you're recording it, so that someday I can go back and can say, look, see, I was right. I actually think in a lot of those markets that there's an opportunity to do a little bit of a skip and go from DC to DC power instead of switching it to AC power. And if you're not familiar, and I'm just going to say Edison was right in the beginning, DC power is what we need. But the problem historically was when we created the electrical grid, we didn't have a way to push direct current a long distance. And the only way we could do that was turning it to alternating current. So even though DC current was better, we said we can only solve this transmission problem this way. So we flip it. But here's what happens. Anytime you create energy, solar panel, wind, whatever, you're creating direct current, DC power. Then you flip it with an inverter to AC so you can put it on the grid. Well, with a good inverter, you're going to lose about 8% of your power. Okay, 8%, gone. Then you're going to push it out to somebody's home and you're going to have some loss in there, say like a couple of percent, but we'll forget that one. And then you get to your home and you plug in your cell phone, and guess what? It requires DC power. So it flips it back and you just lost another 8%. So you literally lost 15 to 20% of your energy just flipping between AC and DC. So if I had my way, and I certainly will be pushing for this, when we go to places where they don't already have an AC grid, why on earth would we not start providing more equipment and things in DC? And don't ever flip to AC, because if you think about, here's a crazy number for you. I read from, oh gosh, it was one of the environmental agencies in the US. So I'd have to look it up. But I read they had done a study that a 3% efficiency across the entire US grid would be the equivalent of taking 19 million cars off the road. 3%. AC to DC would save you 16 to 18%. So if you want to save the environment, maybe we consider, doing a little bit more DC. So it's a, personal kind of standpoint on that one, but sometimes it's about how you look at the problem, not necessarily just taking something that exists and making it a little bit better. It's, were we solving the problem correctly to begin with? And one of the things I love, so my system, I have this, so in the long run, say you've got my system in your house and it's giving you all your backup power and you're saving energy and all that good stuff. Well, because it's plug and play, you can take a battery out of the rack and go camping and you have a solar generator, or snap it onto your lawnmower and now you're mowing your lawn. So the idea is we will replace as many diesel engines as we can. But here's the thing. So I was thinking, I did my design on my lawnmower, which quite frankly kicks ass, but it's probably a few years from release, but I love it. But when I was looking at the lawnmower, I'm like, why the hell do we use this massive blade to cut grass? You could use a tiny little piece of plastic to cut grass, but everybody keeps going, well, that's what we do. We have lawnmowers, so I will make that blade sharper. I'll make it go faster. Why do you need that blade? A sharp piece of plastic or whippersnipper does the exact same thing. So why? You don't have to improve a product. You have to go back and say, do we need that to solve the problem, or is there a better way? So sometimes I think we just get into this process of innovation in iteration instead of just stepping back and saying, okay, does that really solve the problem? Do we still need to do it that way, or is there a better way now? Because technology changes. So,
Well, we've gone over. Connie, thank you so much. The comments are coming through crazy in the chat. Really appreciate your sharing your time and your experience with us. That's wonderful. Everybody, if you haven't heard of the Maji Center, you can email me if you have questions or join that Moodle course that I put in the chat. We've got so many opportunities for you to get mentorship and support and help with your business ideas, networking. So key. Wouldn't you say, Connie? Networking is key. It really is. And we're not just talking meet a lot of people. We're talking make genuine connections, like on a human level here. that have an impact on somebody. You know, think about what you can do for them first, not what they can do for you. Anyways, have a great afternoon. It was wonderful. And thank you again, Connie. You're amazing.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Okay.